Hey everybody, Bo Prosser here, BoProsser.com, the Center for Christian Education, Bo and the Beard, back for another video session with my friend Chuck Bugg. Chuck, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Bo.
We are talking today about preaching and teaching for Lent in 2025, remembering that the Lenten season uh, represents the 40 days before Easter. It is a time of introspection and mirrors the time of Jesus in the wilderness. This is a time for us to examine our own wilderness time and to celebrate and ponder our own baptism. Uh, we are, as preachers and teachers, seeking to inspire and motivate the people in our congregation, but above all, we speak to be heard. And you will hear me say that a couple more times in this video. Maybe you'll hear Chuck say that as well. Uh, One of the things that we work towards is having our people think. Oftentimes, they come to hear what we have to say. They go out the back door and they say, "Thank you, that was a really good sermon." Or maybe they just say, "Good morning." But we really want them to go out the door saying, "That sermon really made me think," or "That lesson really challenged me." So we are looking to guide our congregations through the ins and outs of the shadows and light of Lent. Uh, and we have been called, Augustine actually said, we have been called into the art of sacred rhetoric. So, Chuck, help me understand a little bit about what Augustine means by that and what you think about it.
I really look forward to this time to talk about the Lenten journey, Bo, because it's so vital. Uh, when we talk about sacred rhetoric, Augustine or Augustine, however we pronounce the name, uh, he was the one who took rhetoric. Actually, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, started talking about the principles of rhetoric. And in that day and time, the primary form of communication was speaking to people, trying to persuade people. So rhetoric really is trying to persuade people, the art of persuasion. When Augustine wrote his multi-volume work on Christian doctrine, in book 4, he talks about sacred rhetoric, and he pulls on the triangle that is a part of the sacred rhetoric. This was something Aristotle said, but now Augustine is taking what is a part of the culture and world of his day, and he's baptizing it. He's putting it into the stream of his own Christian faith. The triangle of sacred rhetoric or rhetoric is what we call, first of all, uh, the ethos, which simply means the person who is preaching, the character, the authenticity. One of the things that Augustine thought was very important was not just the arrangement of the message and the preaching of the message, but it was the person who was speaking the message. Can we trust that person? Do we believe that person is competent? All of these kinds of things go into what we call ethos. The second part of the triangle of sacred rhetoric is pathos or emotions. Augustine recognized that we don't just speak to the minds of people. One of the beautiful things that so often I go back to in Paul's letter to the Romans is the fact that he says, do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed. And so transformation really is the whole thrust of speaking to people. And one of the ways we do that is by paying attention to the affective side of life. Often this is criticized because some people say, well, you can manipulate people. We're not talking about manipulating people, but we're talking about recognizing that we are all creatures who have emotions. And very often today, one of the ways in which we appeal to the emotions of people is through the use of stories. The third part of the triangle of sacred rhetoric is what is called logos, or the logic of the sermon. With the influence of Fred Craddock, we probably would talk about the movement of the sermon and whether it has flow to it or whether it is disjointed, whether it makes sense. We have to understand that when Augustine was preaching to people, he really was preaching as a Christian apologist. He was preaching to try to convert people to the Christian faith. And so as he spoke to people, he wanted to make sure that these people understood the logic of what he was saying, that it made sense to their minds. So those are really the three triangles that we talk about when we talk about sacred rhetoric. I really think that has so much to do with what we call the Lenten journey, the 40 days of Lent. It begins usually with a gospel text of the temptation of Jesus, where Jesus is tempted in three ways, really to be a spectacular Messiah. He says no to all of those ways, and he chooses another path to be the Messiah that God has sent. And then the journey begins. And one of the things that I like about using terms like journey is it reminds us of the dynamic, organic nature of faith. We never get to a place, or we should never get to a place, where we say, this is all there is, and we're stopping here in terms of our Christian growth. The journey is growing not just in our understanding of the dynamics of the Christian faith, but growing in terms of what Jesus thought was so important, and that is love for God and love for other people, as well as love for ourselves. So on this journey of Lent, as I'm making my way to the crucifixion and ultimately the resurrection of Jesus, I'm going to be looking at my own life and asking, what needs to be transformed in my life? If I'm preparing a sermon, I'm going to be asking myself, as I look at that sermon and look at the biblical text, what are the ways in which that text is seeking not just to inform me, not just to conform me, but far more important, to transform you and me into more of the persons that God wants us to be. So I love this journey of Lent, this journey to our baptism, our journey of our understanding all that that means to be baptized, and then continuing to understand, not stopping at some point and saying, we now understand uh, the words of the Christian faith, or we now say, I believe in this, but we are always trying to take our beliefs and take that root word of belief, which is live, and to live out in our lives more of what Christ has called us to be.
So, Chuck, these are challenging times, uh, times when half of the church may think one way and the other half of the church may think a different way on social, political, theological topics. Uh, these are times that we have to tread very carefully from the pulpit as we challenge our folks to be transformed, to accept transformation. Some of that is the care that we give to people through the week so that they understand that we love them. My vision statement, people go where they know they've been prepared for and cared for. Certainly a way, as people live into us, we live into them, trust grows deeper, and perhaps we can be a bit more candid. Uh, However, oftentimes you have said before there are three roles that we play as the pastor. Sometimes we are that uh, of a prophet, sometimes we are that of a priest, and sometimes we are that of a peacemaker. So today we're going to look at a couple of uh, what we think are key points to consider as we are preaching and teaching to encourage people, whether it be from the role of prophet or priest or peacemaker, to help folks really live into the depth of this Lenten experience. So, Chuck, you begin with the word invention. Tell us a little bit about that.
By invention, I simply mean that as preachers, we need to know what this sermon is about. Usually, we try to do that in writing one positive sentence that doesn't have therefores and whereases, one positive sentence. This is what I want to try to say in the sermon. And so, to me, that really comes from our encounter with the biblical text. As you probably heard me say, Bo, I really believe that the first thing we want to do as we begin to think about the sermon for next Sunday is to sit down with the biblical text and a sheet of paper or however we make notes and just keep looking at that biblical text over and over again and jotting things down that come to our mind. We're not trying to get the sermon at that point. We're simply listening very carefully. We're listening in a prayerful way, and we're jotting down things that come to our mind.
So after we get things on paper, I've got 20 things here that funnel up, if you will, into the so what. How do I get this message put together?
Well, one of the things I do, Bo, is obviously at that point, we're dealing a lot with confusion and not with clarity. And what we don't want to do is press for clarity too quickly. I suggest that after we've done this, kind of letting the text speak to us, writing things down, that then we leave it and we begin to do other things that we have to do. It may be going to the hospital, but what we have in our mind is we have all of these things that we've written down, that we've seen in the text, and they're kind of bouncing around in our mind. And then we go back, and usually by that time, there is something in there that stands out that I believe needs to be said in the coming Sunday. So then I choose that, which means when we say yes to whatever it is we're going to make as the primary theme of our sermon, we have to say no to the other things. A lot of sermons collapse because we're trying to bring way too many things in, and we don't say no, or I'll see you later in another sermon when I preach in this text. And that usually results in our being confused about what we're trying to say, and the congregation's being confused. You mentioned,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
you mentioned about the times in which we live. I just wanted to say just a word, not that I have the answer to that, but obviously these are difficult times because I feel as if I am being bombarded by all kinds of things that are happening in the political arena. Now, that's not to take sides, but it is to say that there are so many things that are changing, that are becoming different from the way they were. And it is like trying to absorb all of those things, which means that people are going to come to our sermons and their minds are going to be more cluttered than at other times in life. And it means they may hear something that we never intended to be political. They may hear it in that way. I do think that the role of the minister is not to get up and say, I want you to become a Democrat or a Republican, but I think it is our role to speak to the issues that are express care for those who are poor, those who are sick, those who are disenfranchised, those who have little. I think this is the gospel message. And so maybe in a way of, isn't it interesting that there are some people with so much and some people with so little? What do you think about that? What do you think Jesus would say to that? And then we may want to, as Walter Brueggemann says, we may want to hunker down behind the biblical text in order to speak. What does Jesus say to that? And I don't think you're going to have many honest parishioners that say Jesus was out for the wealthy and was out for those who had a lot and was on the side of those who were the powerful. Be very difficult to make that kind of case.
Jesus spoke truth to power, and he spoke it though with mercy and with tough love. And I think we let the words of Jesus speak. more than we let my words or your words speak sometimes around those issues. So that moves us into delivery. We've got the so what, then we've figured out what that roadmap is going to look like. Um, for some, that becomes an outline. For some, that becomes a manuscript. For some, that becomes three sentences and a reference, perhaps. The key, though, is to remember that we're speaking to people. We're not speaking to a TV camera. We're not speaking to a blank page. We are communicating back and forth with the people that are before us. And so communication is the key. What you said earlier about communication is that primarily it was oral transmission. And most of us in seminary were taught to preach and teach through a written message. Uh, and so when we stand before people, we have gestures. We may have big gestures, we may have small gestures. We have eye movement, we have our eyebrows and our facial expressions. We even have our body and maybe even a prop. There are lots of ways to reflect the message. I once stood in a chair at a church to represent the bigness of Goliath. And I still have church members who remind me of the bigness of Goliath because of
Right.
that image. But we have all these things that are available to us beyond a comma or an exclamation point, which the congregation never sees. Uh, we don't have to speak in complete sentences. We have freedom of our body and our voice. And so we have to think clearly about what our voice is going to be doing, our body is going to be doing, our hands are going to be doing at a certain time. One of the things that you have taught me and in your years of coaching me is that I had a tendency to look down when I was going to make an important point. I wanted to make sure I got that point exactly right, and I would look down at my notes. And you said to me, the most important point of your sermon, you need eye contact with your congregation. And so you taught me very well about looking up when that important point is coming. One of the things, Chuck, that I often get is why didn't Jesus speak to issues? You, as you just said, why don't we have a clearer understanding of Jesus speaking out to the issues of our day? And I would say Jesus did speak to the issues both of his day and our day. Micah 6:8, Jesus would have quoted because the people would have known that verse of acting justly, loving mercy, walking humbly. The Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and mind. That was on the doorpost of every Jewish home. It was prayed twice daily. Jesus did speak the Shema. He models ways for us to speak gently to challenge our audience. Uh, Let me tell you this story. There once was a man who had two sons. Let me tell you this story. There once was a woman by a well. There are a wealth of stories where Jesus did take on the issues of his day and I would say our day. The Great Commission and the Great Commandment are the keystones to Jesus's ministry. And all of that was represented best in my opinion, in the Sermon on the Mount. And so Jesus gives us ways through scripture, and Brueggemann's words, hunker down with the passage, I think is great advice. Anything else on presentation and delivery you would say to us?
Well, Bo, you've said a lot of important things, and a lot of the things that I would say. Um,
You're a good teacher, Chuck. That's why.
well, thank you, Bo. You're very kind. One of the things I would say is kind of an overarching uh, theme in the matter of the presentation or the delivery of the sermon is that we need to prepare the sermon for the delivery. Many times we prepare the sermon for the manuscript, for the words, and not for the fact that this needs to be an oral event. Now, we do some writing, but it doesn't stop with the writing. We're coming to an oral event. That means that my presence to people is important. It would be as if you and I were having a conversation, and you would think it very strange if suddenly I pulled out of my pocket some notes and I responded to you with these notes that I had. Now, I know that ministers use different things, and I want to be understanding of the different ways that ministers function. Some ministers simply do not feel at home in the pulpit without the full manuscript. Some don't feel at home without notes. And I understand that. The problem is when we write a sermon, we usually write it in the same way that we're writing a term paper. And that is, there are paragraphs. Now, in oral communication, those paragraphs are the transitions in the sermon. It usually is at the end of a paragraph and at the beginning of the next paragraph that the most important things are said. So that if I'm saying to myself, I don't want to get off track, so that every time, if I'm using a manuscript, every time I have a change of paragraph, I'm going to look down to make sure that I'm getting it right. Well, I may look down at just the point of saying, and the younger son came home ready to give his confession. And the father hugged him, the ring, the robe, the fatted calf. Let's have a party because my son, who once was dead, is now alive. And that is powerful. And that needs to be said to people's lives, to, to be present to the people, so that if I'm using a full manuscript, my primary concern is that I'm going to be reliant on that manuscript, particularly at the points of transition. And I'm also going to prepare that manuscript as we usually prepare a term paper: complete sentences, periods, semicolons, whatever, rather than doing what we can do in oral communication. What do you think about that? What do you think about the fact that the older son, who had given so much, hears the sounds of the party and he's not the one who is honored? I want to ask you, is that fair?
Mhm.
Is it fair to work hard and to have somebody, your younger son, your younger brother, who's been in the far country? Is it fair to have the party for him? Well, no, it's not fair. But the fact is that this is a story about grace, and grace is never fair. Thank God it's never fair.
Well,
So,
you just preached us out of the shadows, Dr. Bugg. Well done.
well, thank you, Bo. It wasn't anything I had planned, so it probably wasn't as polished as I would like. But
It was perfect.
that's just sort of thing where you and I can enter this story and be surprised. You know, we never go to something in the Bible with the idea of here I go again, or you already know this. Well, they may already know it, but they don't know it.
Yes.
They don't know it maybe in the way that you're going to say it, or if they know something of it, they're going to get the fullness of it. Thank God it's not fair. Or one of the ways that I've preached sometimes about people who have a lot and who are very powerful is a story of what we call the rich young ruler. Jesus told him what he needed to do to sell everything and give it to the poor. He walked away, and do you notice Jesus is not standing there scolding him, yelling at him as he leaves. Jesus is crying because he missed the point of life.
Yeah. Yes. So you say, in fact, you said tonight, once the sermon is written, that's not the end of the process. So what's next?
Well, frankly, Bo, when I'm doing a sermon, and it's been an evolution of ways of preparation for me. When I began, I had the full manuscript, and that's why I want to be, um, I want to be fair to those who are beginning in their preaching ministry. But what I want to do is to encourage all of us to grow in the way in which we preach. It's not finding instantly the only way to preach. It may become an evolution. And for me, it has been an evolution. At first, it was getting the sequence of words that I'd written in correct order and right. Now I'm remembering what Augustine said: ethos, presence, authenticity, character, pathos. Is there some emotion to this? Jesus is weeping. And logos. Does this sermon have movement that makes logical sense, or is it so disjointed that people can't follow?
Yeah. And our job is to take it off of that flat page, whether it be the page of scripture or the page of a manuscript. And so practice, 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 and edit, edit, edit. Those are
Right.
words I've used with our students before. Writing it is one thing, delivering it is something else. And you have to practice that. And halfway through a sermon, you may think, I need to cut this out. I need to stop this. And as you said earlier, say, I'll see you later, or I'll see you next time. That was a great point. Uh,
Mm.
but we are communicators. We're not readers of words on a page. We are communicators,
Right.
and and in some ways, we are actors on a stage, interacting with that holy rhetoric, interacting with the 3 points of that triangle, uh,
Mhm.
trying to bring that to reality. Uh, you have a great way of using your hand. I'm always amazed when you preach. It's like you have your manuscript in your hand. I know you don't, but that's such a powerful moment when you have done that in the past, and you have found ways to be true to yourself, live into yourself, but bring a powerful message. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Bo. I appreciate those words, and I think it's always a matter of growing. And even at 82, I see things about something I've done and think to myself, that could have been done more effectively. Um, you know,
Well, you are a master, and thank you for sharing this time with me today. Uh,
well,
just wonderfully helpful as we prepare for the Lenten journey, in that dance of light that makes shadows sometimes and makes light sometimes. And as you said, we're leading towards transformation. And Lord have mercy, I pray for transformation for us right now and in the days to come. Thank you so much, Chuck, for your
thank you,
words.
Bo. Thank you for letting me share with you. Always.
Absolutely. We preach and teach to be heard. And I hope you've heard some things today that will be helpful to you. We are helping people move towards the resurrection, towards that great Easter Sunday and beyond. But there's a lot of work to be done on this journey before we get there. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks especially to Chuck Bugg and to Jamie, our editor, and all the folks that make this happen. BoProsser.com, the Center for Christian Education, Bo in the Beard. For Chuck Bugg, till I see you again, keep on rocking.